Think of the last time you felt disrespected. And I'm not talking about constructive criticism intended to help you grow. I'm also not talking about the absence of respect that you earn over time through contributions and merit. I'm talking about those everyday interactions that slowly and silently tell you you don't matter. If you think about it, most villain origin stories start this way. Take the Joker, for example, from the Batman comics. He was repeatedly laughed at, ridiculed, ignored. Or Darth Vader from the Star Wars series. Repeatedly mistrusted, controlled, never really listened to. And then there's the Wicked Witch of the West from the famous movie Wizard of Oz, where she was feared and judged without ever being understood. Repeated disrespect changes us. It changes how we view the world. It changes how we receive it, how we perceive it, and how we interact within it. Now, I'm a surgeon. I've spent tens of thousands of hours in the operating room restoring sight. Whether it's removing shards of glass from an eye from someone who's been in a car accident when their windshield shattered, or restoring vision by removing cataracts, which is the natural lens in the eye that becomes cloudy with time. So it changes how we see the world. So if you're wondering, why is an eye surgeon so passionate about talking about respect? I understand that question, and so I'll share my story with you. When I was in medical school, I really struggled. This was a surprise to me. I've always been a high achiever. I've always done well. I had gone from an undergraduate program where you were given the information, you wrote your exams, you knew you did well, if you did well on your exams, to a medical school that was a self-directed program. You were given a case, you decided on objectives with your group, you studied on your own, and decided when you'd learned enough. I was really bad at that. I was always so worried about hurting someone, or even worse, potentially killing someone, that I would learn my objectives, and yet I would get caught in this cycle of, what about this? What about that? What about this? I spiraled into self-doubt, even though all of my evaluations were positive. On one rotation, I had a meeting with my supervisor, and he said, Nina, your knowledge is great, your patient outcomes are fantastic, your decision-making is sound. You're doing well. The following week, I saw another faculty member who was not my supervisor and who had a reputation of being a bit of a bully. He called me aside, he said, Nina, you will never get into the specialty of your choice. Now, I was already facing a lot of self-doubt. I wasn't sure, did I even belong in medicine? Do I know what I'm doing? Should I be here? So his words really stuck with me. And I learned an important lesson from that as leaders, whether we're in education or any industry, we have a profound impact on the people around us. When I got into residency, and I did get into the specialty of my choice, I was very fortunate to have wonderful mentors because I had gone in with significant imposter syndrome based on what I'd been through in medical school. At the same time, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and I remember having such pain, I wasn't sure if I was going to make it from the clinic to the lounge. Now, my supervisors, they saw my potential as a surgeon. They respected the effort that I was putting in to try to meet my responsibilities and obligations, even though I was in so much pain. They also respected the fact that I was dealing with a new diagnosis, and so they came to me, my program director and academic chair, and said, Nina, you should take a medical leave so you can learn how to manage your diagnosis. And so I did. I took a month off, I came back, I was much stronger mentally and physically. I still had the pain, but at least I knew how to manage the condition. That's a powerful reminder of how respect for someone else's experience and empathy can change the trajectory or the experience of someone's path. It was because of that respect and the support from my family that I was able to successfully get it through this very challenging period. But what happens when the people around us can't empathize? They can't understand our experience. What about that? After I finished residency and I started my surgical practice, I joined a number of leadership roles. I took on a number of positions for the local to national levels. And I started to notice a pattern. Some leaders were excellent at creating positive work and learning environments. Others were even better at creating toxic ones. Anybody know those? Right? I remember walking down the hallway one day and I ran into an administrative coordinator who I knew very well. This person was fantastic, but very visibly upset. So I called them aside and I said, what's wrong? Something's off. You don't seem to be yourself. And they said that their current boss was very belittling and demeaning in their interactions, throwing charts at them, raising their voice if there was another opinion expressed, slamming their fist on a desk if there was disagreement. They'd put in a complaint to the organization, which was backed by several other administrative people and students. Nothing was done. There was no accountability. Now imagine dedicating your time, energy, effort to something you really care about. And then when it matters most, the very systems that you're relying on to count on you, they don't have your back. They do nothing. That can be your team, that can be your organization, that can be your system, that can be your government. Now what? This coordinator felt that they had no choice but to leave the position. It was a huge loss for the organization. It decreased productivity, it decreased morale. Why? Because disrespect was not only there, it was enabled. How would you feel? As I saw this in more context, I started getting more frustrated and more angry. And I couldn't believe how leaders were enabling other people to be disrespectful, and sometimes they themselves were as well, and there was no accountability. And so 6 years ago, I was inspired to create my organization where I teach and mentor executives and senior leaders how to create environments that are positive and respectful, but reliably respectful. And what I mean by reliably respectful is it goes beyond psychological safety, where people feel comfortable expressing their views, where they also know and can have the confidence that their views will be received well, that they will be taken seriously, that they will be thoughtfully considered. This became my new passion. And as I continued this work, I recognized two themes which form the basis of this work. Number one, when people feel respected, they feel connected and they thrive. And number two, when people repeatedly feel disrespected, eventually they will disengage. Is it not true? Recent Gallup poll of the workplace showed that 37% of employees strongly agree that they feel respected at work. Only 37%, that's a record low for this poll. Another national study showed that 3 out of 5 people who quit their jobs said that disrespect played a significant role in their decision-making. What compounds that is the culture of silence. Nobody wants to say anything for fear of being judged negatively in some way, maybe even incompetent, missing out on opportunities, being reprimanded, or payback. Anybody ever felt that? You don't want to say what you really think? This added stress of having to stay silent and comply increases the risk of burnout. So I would argue that people don't burn out just because of the work. They burn out because of repeated disrespect. Respect is one of the most overlooked performance tools in the workplace and learning environment. And in my experiences as a surgeon, educator, leader, and in life, respect is the emotional currency of success. And it's up to leaders to create environments where, sure, there may be losses sometimes, but people should be set up for gains. So, where does that take us now? As I thought about this more and more, and as I became more attuned to what was going on, I started asking myself these questions. What is it about respect? This formed the foundation of the memoir on stress that I wrote, as well as a lot of the work that would follow. And so as I started asking this question, I started thinking, what is it? I want you to think of this as a windshield or a lens. It's not clear, but it's there to make a point. That's why it's not clear. Every experience we have creates a crack in our windshield. Some cracks are smaller than others. More emotional ones are bigger. Being cut off, being dismissed, a good moment in life. All of these things become the lens through which we view the world. They accumulate, the cracks accumulate, and this is how we see the world, receive it, and interact with it. Now, what happens here is that the same experience, the same moment, the same comment can be received very differently by two people. Why? Not because one's weaker or one's more sensitive, but because they're viewing it and experiencing it through a different lens. And this is why self-awareness is the core of leadership. Understanding the lens through which you view the world so you can understand your interactions with others, how to lead yourself better, and how to lead others more effectively. So when we feel disrespected, what's happening? The emotional moments that we have in our life form imprints in the emotional centers of our brain. Whether they're highs in life or lows in life, they form emotional imprints. And when these are triggered and there's a perceived threat, the protection center of our brain is activated, and it mobilizes us to move. If there's a true physical threat, we see a bear, we want to run. You may have heard of the fight or flight response. Emotionally, in communication, this translates into snapping at someone, throwing something at someone, slamming your fist on a desk. That impacts the environment around you, and that's why regulation, the ability to manage your emotions in a moment that you're triggered, is so important. As I started looking at the data in my work in this area, I identified 4 key pillars that I call depth perception leadership. And just like with cataracts, you need to go deep into the eye to remove the cloudy lens in order to replace it with a lens that's going to give you a clear view. When it comes to the emotional chaos and lack of clarity that we feel when we're feeling heightened, we need to go deep within ourselves to be able to understand and gain that clarity so we know how we're seeing the world, and again, how we're interacting with it, how we're making our decisions, how we're managing our stresses, how we're leading others, and all of the other things that come with our day-to-day lives. Now, depth perception leadership is relevant to everybody. Why? Because everybody is a leader, whether you realize it or not, whether you have a formal title or not. We all impact the people around us by the things that we do and say. And the earlier thing about comments that make you feel like you don't matter, every single person matters. Depth perception leadership, 4 pillars. First one is alignment. Does something feel off? Does it align with your values and expectations? Before surgery, we tell people, please don't eat or drink anything before your surgery. It's a safety issue. One day I was about to do cataract surgery on an elderly gentleman. He was lovely, he was in his 80s. I went to ask him, did you have anything to eat or drink? And he said, well, yes, I had a donut. In that moment, I felt very frustrated. I felt this wave of frustration because we give our patients instructions 3 times and in writing twice. And I was like, you didn't listen to instructions. There was a misalignment in my expectations and value for his safety. So the awareness of the frustration is the first step to being able to regulate in a moment. The second pillar, interpretation. Recognizing that people see things differently. They see things through their own lens. I asked the patient, I said, why did you have a donut? We told you to not have anything to eat or drink. And he said, yes, but you said that we could have, clear fluids up to a certain time, which was true. And he said, so I had a coffee. And then he looked at me really confused. And he said, how can you have a coffee without a donut? Great question. You are not wrong about that. How can you have a coffee without a donut? He did not intentionally not follow instructions. He just interpreted them differently through his own lens. Now, I was able to ask questions. I pulled myself out of my emotional brain and frustration and the trigger that I was feeling into asking questions to understand his perspective. And that's where regulation comes in. Regulation is about responding with curiosity because, again, it pulls you out of the emotional center, brings you into logic center. You can start thinking about solutions. You can start thinking about what else could be true, as we've heard before. And so those are things that become really important. And then as you regulate, as you look at different options, as you consider different possibilities, that creates a ripple effect because it changes the dynamic. Also, we were able to reschedule his surgery to later in the day because he was originally booked early enough. He was able to have his surgery. He was thrilled. And we learned something very important by asking those questions in the regulation phase, and that is that we needed to improve our information for patients to make sure that we had positive outcomes when it came to surgery from a safety standpoint. Now, when you consider the ripple effect, just like the cracks in the lens, some are small, like a scheduling change, and some can be much larger. So consider the feedback from the faculty member who was a bully, which really wasn't feedback, it was a flippant comment. Moments like those that land in critical times, especially on the heels of a pattern of disrespect, can lead to progress and contribution from that moment on to disappear just like that. Now, I'm not saying that everyday interactions are about never being triggered. That's not my point. There will be disappointment. There will be disagreement. There will be times when we're on opposing sides of a situation. What matters, though, is what we do next and how we do it. We may not get it right every single time, but each of us has the power to create an environment around us that is respectful. We can either support an environment of respect, or we can erode it. And so I leave you with this question. In your world, what ripples will you create? Thank you.